Hello everyone and welcome back to LRN and an exciting episode today as we take a look in depth at the behind the scenes video released by Frontier devs for F1Manager 2022. Some awesome content in there, awesome screenshots and new knowledge coming out about how this game is going to work and how it's going to truly deliver on that team principal view of an F1 team who's answering to the board of directors, trying to fulfill their objectives and obviously bring their team to success, dependent on what success looks like for each individual team. And we'll look at that in more detail as the video progresses. If you are new around here, please do make sure to subscribe for all future uploads. We will be covering F1 Manager game in loads of detail and with loads of content once it finally hits later this summer. But for now, let's get straight into it. So what we're going to do is we're going to kick off with the choose a team element of the game. Something I'm imagining will be one of the first steps you take in the F1 game, F1 Manager game when you start off. And we're just going to have a look at some of the options here and what we think it will mean for the game moving forward. So as you can see from the screenshot in front of you, that's going to cycle through a couple of the teams. We've got Ferrari, Mercedes and McLaren as well as the AlphaTauri. And you'll see that dependent on the team, you get a different rating, a different season objective, a different long-term objective, and a different starting budget. And from what I can see, the team rating's an interesting one. So we can see that Ferrari is obviously rated lower than Mercedes. Now, obviously, Ferrari historically the most successful team in F1. I think maybe the team rating, the impact it will have is on maybe sponsorship deals. So the higher your rating as a team, the more successful you are, the high rating goes up, and therefore you can sign better sponsorship deals, securing a bigger budget and allowing you to work on more updates and plan ahead for future seasons more easily, which makes the challenge of catching those teams, as we've seen with Mercedes. Once they were in front, they stayed out in front for 7 years, and obviously with Ferrari in the past when Michael Schumacher was at the team. When a team gets that far out in front, it can be difficult to challenge them because they're the successful team. They're the team that all the sponsors want to be working with, and therefore it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. They have the most money, they have the quickest development, they then therefore have the quickest cars. And what will you be able to do as an opposing team principal if you do choose to go with a sort of a lower end team to bridge that gap? How will the budget principles work in the game? Do you get to spend more as a lower team, like in real life now? The lower teams will have more money to spend than the teams at the front, and it'll be done on a ladder scheme. So maybe that'll be the case. Maybe we can spend more money as a low-end team and then start to build up and then get better sponsors, build that team rating and slowly bridge that gap to the top teams. But really interesting to see that Ferrari's objective is to finish first and Mercedes to finish third, even though Mercedes have a higher team rating. So clearly they've retained their sponsorship and rating from previous seasons where they've been winning. Obviously they're 7-time constructors, so even though we know that the Ferrari is the quicker team this season, obviously this is based on the previous years. We know the Mercedes are the highest rated team in terms of their sponsorship ability to sign certain people. However, the Ferrari, as we know, has got the quickest, not the second quickest car on the grid, certainly up there with Red Bull this season. The game seems to reflect that and has the objective of them to finish Constructors' Champion in the first year. So if you are someone that's looking forward to getting in the car with Ferrari, be aware the board of directors will be looking for you to finish first in that first year. But then we move on to McLaren, and we can see that their season objective to start with is 5th. So when you take on that team, they're starting 5th. They're nearly a sort of a 4-star team in terms of team rating, so a little bit lower in the spectrum. And we see that reflected in the starting balance. So I'm imagining, again, where that team rating's a bit lower, the balance is lower because they don't have the level of sponsorship money coming in to give them a budget required to be considered a high budget. Which is really interesting. Again, it then puts the challenge on the player to see what they can do to bring that to improve their budget through the season. long-term objective, constructors champions. I believe that's what they're basically doing. The long term is sort of 3 years down the line, so you're looking at 2025 as the long-term objective, which is pretty cool. So you've got a good 3 seasons of gameplay to take a team, a midfield team like McLaren, and get them back to winning ways, which I think is a really good length of time. But again, it's going to be really interesting to see how the current top teams fight you back, and what those sort of difficulty sliders might be, to how much challenge you have in getting your team to the front, because obviously you want to feel like you've really succeeded in your goals, and it's not just handed to you by the game. As long as you put the time in, it has to be that you've actually made good decisions along the way. So we'll see how that all plays out as we go. And finally, we'll have a quick look at the AlphaTauri. So again, we can see the ball confidence rating here on this one as well. So the season objective for them is 6th or above. We saw McLaren 5th, so AlphaTauri looking to come in just behind McLaren. They've got a long-term objective of being a podium contender, with the target season of 2025. So as I was saying, 2025 is the sort of the long-term objective to start with, and each season I imagine they'll be sort of updated, looking at 3 years down the line, when you will need to be hitting your long-term objectives. So I think that'd be really, really cool. And obviously, yeah, with the board confidence piece, making sure to keep the board on side, so that when things are going well, you get more money maybe invested into the team. They're willing to back you with cash bonuses, as you say here. So higher board cash confidence gives larger cash bonuses after each board review. So the better you do, the more money you're going to get into the team to spend on parts, spend on development, spend on your team, getting in better mechanics, etc. That's going to allow you to really, really push your team to the forefront of Formula One. But as it says on there, they will send a formal warning which may lead them to terminate your contract if they lose total confidence in you. So it really, really is important you're making the right decisions, because you do face the genuine proposition of being sacked if things are not going well. So that could be something really interesting, especially in the lower end teams. Think of taking on a Haas, how badly things could go. If you were Gunter Steiner in last season, when they basically didn't do anything for the whole year because they were focused on the year after, will the board have the patience to allow you to make that sort of decision, where you basically give up a season with the view that the next year is going to be the year for you? We will certainly find out soon. Okay, so next up we have a look at the projected spending and the cost cap. The way the cost caps will work in the game. So again, this is really interesting. The screenshot you can see on at the moment is the Ferrari. It looks like you take on the Ferrari team, and we can see a huge number of outgoings, balance dropping, with a couple of incomings coming in. Obviously, there's going to be more to this in terms of the incomings. I can't see anything here in terms of sponsorship, so there'll be other ways of bringing money into the team. Maybe you get a big bulk of money at the beginning of the year, and then it slowly drains down through the season, and then it's bulked up again at the end when you get another big payout by your sponsors. But we'll see how that works closer to the time. But what you can see is that you've got your obviously total balance. You need to work to a budget in the game. And if we move to the other screenshot on the cost cap spending, you'll see that you have to stay within your cost cap budget, or you will incur a fine because you can break the cost cap, but only to make an emergency purchase. So I'm assuming, let's say you're going through the season, you've basically hit your cap, but you have another engine failure and you have to spend money on another engine. You need to make that decision, but you will incur the fine, which I assume will come out of your budget for the next season if you haven't got any money to pay for it there and then. But you're going to have to sort of weigh up your options. I mean, we saw this season with the Haas that they chose not to run mixed car in one of the races in Saudi, because they didn't want to incur the cost of all the replacement parts, that if he was to crash the car again, they wouldn't have been able to afford to produce the replacements, and it would have impacted them again even into the next race. So that may be something you need to think about. How many spare parts can you invest in? How careful do you need to be through the season not to run the engine maybe too hot, too high, push too much, and nurse the cars through the season to make sure that you're not outside of your budget and you don't get into those scenarios where you're having to maybe pick a car not to run because it's been in an accident and you're spending money on spare parts and things like that. We'll see how much detail you get into through the course of the game, but it certainly looks like a really interesting mechanic, and something you're going to have to be focused on. And as we've mentioned already, You may be limited in your spending. The better you do in the game, the more limited your spending will be in terms of into the next year. So if you are taking on a top team straight away, it's interesting about how you manage that smaller budget to make sure that you're staying there. And if you're on a smaller team, it's about how do you maximize the additional money, because you're going to have smaller departments in terms of your staff. So where you see on here, you've got staff salaries, and what you will have is a limited number of staff in each area. So what you could do is only fill the engineer department, say, half full to save on the monthly amount and keep you in budget. But obviously what you'll miss out on is the expertise and the manpower to produce any upgrades at a rate of knots and however quickly you want to get them onto the car. So there's going to be so much balancing in this because of the cost cap, and what you choose to invest your money and time in, whether that be having it take longer for things to be produced because you reduce your manpower, so it just takes longer to do the R&D, or whether you invest all your money into your staff, get things out as quickly as possible to get you maybe the points right early in the season, but you run out of money towards the end, and then you start to see your competitors coming back at you towards the end of the season because you haven't got the money to keep investing in the team. That could be another dynamic. But I think, again, with this cost cap dynamic that we're going to see through the F1 Manager game, it's going to be really interesting to see how it plays out. So now we're going to have a look at how the individual teams work. So we can see here for this team, as Red Bull Racing to this career is clearly with, they've got their technical chief, head of aerodynamics, race engineer, and a second race engineer, with the options of engineering team, scouting team, and pit crew, and the option to scout key staff as well. So you could sack some and bring another one in with a better rating. So it looks like they're rated out of 100, so same as the drivers. And again, I think this will come back to cost. So I think obviously that the better the rating of the person you're hiring, the more likely the more money they're going to cost. So you might choose to have a small team of really high rated people, or maybe go for a big team of more average people, and try and weigh up that option as you progress through the game, depending on the budget that you've got. But it's really cool that they've got real people in there. I'm sure there'll be, as you can see, some not real people to flesh it out as well. But really, really cool that you can look at that and maybe use that as part of your budgeting. And as you'll see here on this screenshot, you can look at the race engineer. We've got Hugh Bird, so we've got his age, his morale was okay. So the morale system is going to be really important. They do talk about it in the video, the fact that you're going to have to focus on the links between from the very top, from the board of directors all the way to the drivers and everyone in between back at the factory, how they relate to their relationship with each other, how each decision affects the morale of everyone around them. It could be if you sack someone, maybe other people in the team get their morale gets damaged. It's going to be really, really interesting to see how that plays out, and how you choose to balance the morale of the team, and how decisions right at the top could impact how maybe quickly you can get something developed for the car, because the morale of the R&D department back at the factory has been really hit quite badly. So they're producing things slower, and maybe parts fail more often because there's less focus on getting things done properly. So could be really, really important to the way that the game works out and how your season plays out, and all those fine details that really make a difference. And they do make a point in the video of trying to get the player to understand how much goes on in the background to produce a winning team on a race day. The bit that everyone watches, all that stuff that builds up to it, that's what you're going to get to experience. And looking at this, the morale of a race engineer in the team, those little details and what you have to do to impact that and get their morale up is going to be really, really interesting. And we can see here that Hugh Bird is linked to Sergio Perez. So obviously you have maybe it'll be linked to the performance of their drivers, what their morale is impacted by. And we also see he's got 0 development points. So, how will that work? How will we get more development points for the race engineer? Is it specific to each driver? We'll see how that plays out when the full game comes out. But some really, really interesting stuff there. And finally, we have the screen that shows the team size. So as we sort of discussed already, you've got a potential size of 12. This one has 6 at the moment, so they're sort of choosing to sit in the middle, and you have to balance. So as it says, hire additional engineers to speed up car parts development, or reduce the team size to lower the sub team's total monthly salary. So again, what we talked about already, that balance of how quickly do you want the parts for the car to be developed, and how much do you want to save on your budget to invest in other areas of the team and the factory and what you see on a race day. So going to be really interesting. I'd love to see how other people make their decisions. Obviously, in my game, you'll be able to see the decisions I make. Maybe we can make it interactive and give it to you guys to choose how I progress through certain events and what decisions I make. But depending on whether you choose to go back of the grid, midfield, or the front, those decisions are going to vary drastically, I would imagine. And I'll be really, really interested to see how different people approach it. So next up, we've got car development. So what you'll see on this screenshot here is it shows the number of upgrades built out of 30. So we've got a possible upgrade built out of 30 for the car. This is, as you can see in the background, for Mercedes career mode. First question for me is, will this differ dependent on the car? Well, as the Mercedes is already a front-running car, does it have less potential upgrades than maybe Williams, where they should have potentially loads more upgrades that they could do? Or is it just going to be that fixed number out of 30? Once you've done them all, that's your maxed out car, similar to the F1 My Team mode. We'll have to see how that plays out. And again, the facility summary as well, total upgrades built 30 out of 80, and the total monthly upkeep for that. Now, my issue here is it going to be once you've maxed out these departments, that's it? I know that there's some focus on refurbishment. They mention it in the video that you will have to look at making sure that all your buildings are maintained. So maybe actually having everything invested in costs you more money, and it impacts your budget because you're constantly refurbishing to keep everything up to scratch. That could be it, that actually having all of the upgrades can be detrimental to your total budget because you're having to maintain everything, so it isn't always a benefit to have all those buildings, possibly. But I do worry that once you've got everything in place, you're going to be at that position where there's nowhere to go. With the car development side, there could of course be an R&D change where they reset everything and you have to start from scratch. That would be really cool. I'd love it if 3, 4, 5 years into the game there was a huge reset and you had to start again. But I do have that concern that maybe, like with the My Team game, yes, they do that, but then you've got so many R&D points or so much money stored up or whatever it might be that you can actually very, very quickly turn it around and get back to a maxed out car. So I'm just praying that there's a way that they can maintain a constant, process of having to fight to stay at the front and not just get stuck after, say, 4 or 5 seasons, that you are going to be at the front and that's kind of it. If you want a challenge, you've got to start a whole new game. So again, yeah, we'll see how that plays out into the game proper. And finally, we've got this screen here where you can see the different areas within the wider team, sort of the building upgrades, the factory upgrades, design center, wind tunnel, safety simulator, suspension simulator, and car parts test center. So all of these will impact the different areas of the team separately. Obviously, suspension simulator, I'm imagining that improves the performance around the suspension as you progress through the season. So the better upgrades you have at the factory for suspension simulator, the better R&D improvement parts you'll see come out for the suspension onto the actual car itself, and that will work the same for all of the different areas available here. Again, the question is, what happens when it's maxed out? How does that sort of progress? Obviously the monthly upkeep goes up, but will that, where you're in the top team with a lower budget, will it really impact you? That will be really interesting to me. So as you can see here, we've got the refurbish option on the car pass test center. So you've got refurbish cost of 6.3 million, or an upgrade cost of 12 million. At the moment, this is in a maximum condition, but you will have to pay to refurbish these centers. And I'm assuming the more they're upgraded, the higher that refurbishment cost gets. So it will just be a question of, will it be so high that it really does impact your ability to improve the car because you're too busy improving your facilities? Yet to be seen. I hope so. I hope there is some sort of incentive for not upgrading everything to the top, or at least not for a long time, but we will see as we move through the game. Now this one's really interesting, and you can see that you manage the build of each car individually. Now this one's really cool for me. So we see it a lot with F1 teams where they trial upgrades on one car to see whether or not it's worth developing for the second car and the cost involved in doing that. And I think this could be a really, really good way of trying to manage your budget like they do in real life. If you say you can see that your car needs more downforce and you put in, say, a load of money into either the rear wing, the front wing, or the floor, but you want to make sure that it's a really impactful upgrade that the engineers have delivered you before you make a final decision on whether to proceed with the part that they've brought forward, you may want to trial it on one car with no spare parts, so you just have the one part. Put it on the first car, let them trial it, see what happens to the time difference between the two cars. If you find that it is worthwhile, you then go away and develop it for both cars and potentially spare parts as well. That would be really cool. But the ability to do the cars individually, I think, is really, really important, and definitely something to make the most of. If you're going to be playing the game, really look at that as a way of stretching your money as far as it can go, especially if you're in the lower end teams. I think that would be a really key little detail that will save you quite a lot of money. So yeah, definitely something to look out for there. So finally, we have the email system. As you see here, kind of standard on management games. This is what you'd expect. You also do get it a bit on the F1 game, where you come back into the between the races, look at your emails, they give you details about the circuits. Similar here, talking about in this particular screenshot the Bahrain Grand Prix, talking about the telemetry of the car, showing that it's looking really good at top speed. Sorry, the top speed of the car could be improved compared to the rest of the grid. So you might want to focus on developing a a more aerodynamically efficient maybe rear wing to help the top speed of the car down the long straights, as an example. And also, interestingly enough, it talks about sort of training for the driver. So Charles Leclerc noticed the smoothness performance of Charles Leclerc could be improved. So we can also see that he's 82 rated. If we do training sessions, unlike the F1 game, where they kind of just improve with time, and you can obviously buy different facilities that boost the performance of the second driver, with this it may be more like training sessions, maybe more like a football based thing where you focus them on certain parts of their game. They improve stats on certain areas, like smoothness is suggested here, and that could make them really good at maybe specific tracks where it helps them on their tire wear, and things of that nature, where it could really drive their improvement. Again, my question will be, how will the AI do this? How will the opposition drivers? We don't want, with F1 My Team, you get to a state where it seems like every driver is 100 rated. We don't want that. That certainly shouldn't be the case. Yes, younger drivers should improve and get to a certain standard, but what I'd also like to see is the older drivers, say you've got Fernando Alonso in your car, he is realistically not going to improve. Him, like people like Alonso and Vettel, they should be around the same level. No matter, and it should take loads and loads of time to get them to improve even a little bit, and other things should be getting worse during that time. As they're getting older and closer to retirement, you should expect them to naturally decrease in their stats, so that you get a natural fluctuation. We definitely don't want to see all of the young drivers suddenly 99 rated. That should be reserved for people who are seen as the highest potential, something the the FIFA games, football manager games have got done really well in the past. I really hope the F1 game gets that right, and they don't just give the opportunity to get every driver to 99 as long as you train them correctly. That I wouldn't want to see. But still a really interesting mechanic, and something that's going to be really fun to get into when we get into the game proper. Well, that's it, guys. That's been my review of the behind the scenes footage from F1 Manager and Frontier devs. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Is there anything you've seen that I haven't called out from the video? Anything you're looking forward to in the game that I haven't mentioned? All I can say is I'm really excited for this. I can't wait to get the proper F1 Manager content out when this game launches later in the summer. Please do make sure you're subscribed. Really helps the channel grow, and it'll make sure that you're notified of all the videos that come out on F1 Manager game when the game does go live. And make sure to hit a like on the video if you did enjoy. But otherwise, I'm going to thank you so much for watching. Hope you have a great day. Goodbye.